Hi people, welcome back to the Grit and Growth podcast. Obviously, this is everything in between mindset, business, personal life. We're here to help you. Today I am super chuffed to have Nigel Hartley with me. Now, Nigel is the CEO of Mountbatten Hospice. I'm actually fortunate enough to have met Nigel, and my sister who passed away and my nan both were in the hospices that Nigel looks after. Super inspirational guy. I'm going to let you, Nigel, do your little introduction here in terms of your backstory and where you've come from and what you've done with the hospice and personal life.
Yeah, well, thank you, Charlie. Really happy to be here. I've worked in hospices all my career, really, so about 36, 37 years at the moment.
Cool.
Started, I guess if anyone had said to me, you're going to be working in a hospice, let alone leading one, I wouldn't have believed them when I was in my early 20s. I trained to be a concert pianist.
Oh, slightly different.
Slightly different. And I'd done a degree in psychology, and I broke my hand. Someone shut a car door on my hand. So it didn't stop me playing the piano, but I think for the first time, and I think at that age, I don't think we're very good at thinking what we really want to do with our lives. And I'd gone along playing the piano just because I was good at it, and everyone else thought I was good at it, and that's what I should be doing. And when this happened, it was a real wake-up call, because my first thought was, actually, this is giving me the opportunity to think differently about what I might want to do with my life. And I'd done a degree in psychology. I then trained as a counsellor and as a music therapist. And at the same time, a very good friend of mine in my early 20s died of an AIDS-related illness.
Oh.
So a group of us looked after him in London in the mid-80s, which was not the time to be dying of AIDS, really.
No.
So watching that and being part of it and seeing how healthcare is never ready for these kinds of things when they come along, and watching somebody die in a terrible situation, really.
And I would have assumed relatively young and similar age.
Yeah,
as you.
absolutely similar age, so early 20s.
Yeah.
And, watching a lot of people dying around us. I guess that made me, well, it kind of motivated me to want to do something about it.
Yes.
And a place called London Lighthouse, which was the first HIV and AIDS centre in London, opened in the mid to late 80s. And I walked in and asked for a job. And they said yes, and then I thought, shit, I've got to do it now. So that's how it started, not by any kind of great plan or thinking about things. So I worked there as a therapist for about 8 or 9 years.
Okay, so quite some time then.
Yeah, quite some time. And I think that whole thing of death was very scary. So I get how scary it is for everyone. I used to turn up at work and be afraid to go in the door. So I'd walk up and down the street a few times before
to build yourself up.
Yeah, and also in those days, and people might not remember, but protesters on the street with placards saying we don't want this in our backyard, kind of thing. So having to kind of push your way through all of that. So it was a bit of a baptism by fire, but I think it kind of woke something in me.
Yeah,
hadn't been there before.
Yeah, okay, I can only imagine. Like you said, I think people probably do forget. Definitely. People listening to this that will forget those protests are even going on. So you're working with people that are dying, and also got a battle through that side it takes. And I mean, that probably leads me on quite well in terms of this is mindset related. Most of the questions I'm going to ask you, obviously, but you said you did a few laps of the street and whatnot to really get the courage to go in. But if you were going to look back to your younger 20s then and think, how did I really, mindset wise, really push through that? Because it would probably have been easier to give up.
Yeah.
So what made you? I know you said it woke something up, but what mindset related traits did you see that you were able to push your way through that?
I think what I've realised in hindsight, probably not so much at the time, is how, for me as an individual, cause has been absolutely everything. So having a cause to kind of fight, to work for, I think that's what was woken up in me. So, seeing this friend of mine dying in the most terrible situation, thinking, actually, that's not okay.
Yeah.
I don't want anyone to have to go through that. And that has really kind of touched something in me at that point.
And we talk about reason why a lot on this podcast, actually, because we've had billionaires on it and we've had people that have had traumatic experiences on this. So all different walks of life, and a lot of them come back to, they talk about the reason why. But as you mentioned there, that probably was that point of which you're like, okay, that's the cause.
Yeah, and that cause to me is everything. It absolutely, even today, gets me up in the morning.
Yeah, and I guess, I guess, look, I've got a strong affiliation to the hospice now. After I saw the care your hospice specifically did for my sister that passed, I always appreciated the work the hospice does. But I will be transparent in saying I was one of those people who looked outside and said, well, that's where people go to die. So my mindset about the hospice was quite, not negative in terms of towards the hospice, but negative in terms of I don't want to face that. And I can definitely see that's a challenge you guys face. So for you personally, since you're 30, I think you said 37 years in the hospice work, I mean, how has that influenced your mindset? Has it made you stronger, weaker, or different times, different periods, different things? I mean, how have you found it?
I think consistently I've found it manageable. Now, articulating why is the hard bit of that.
Okay.
There have been times when it's been difficult.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I've worked with thousands and thousands of dying people. I don't know whether that's normal or not, but it's been my life. Yeah. So I've known thousands and thousands of people who have died, and known some of them quite well. But I guess what has kept me going is 99.9% of those people who've died have not been personal relationships with me. So there's something around creating a professional distance.
Okay, yeah.
And finding a way of doing that. It's not my death. It's not my family's death.
Yeah.
So therefore, I think it makes it you can be slightly removed from it, which I think is helpful. I've seen people not be able to do that.
I can imagine.
I've seen people fall apart very quickly. So dying is scary. You know, I'm scared of dying after 37 years. But take that away, you know, it's going to happen one day, and I don't know what it'll be like. And that's scary to everyone. But I do think what I've learned is that each one of us has a responsibility to think about it in advance, because it is going to happen. And not thinking about it when something does happen, because people get ill. And I guess it's a bit like your experience with your sister and probably your nan as well. It's unexpected. You know,
sister especially.
Yeah, absolutely. So you don't think about, you don't think it's going to happen.
No, not a 26-year-old girl. No, you would never think.
Of course. But I think what I would say at all ages, finding time in our lives to take time to think about what would happen if.
Yeah.
Is really important, because it changes not only your experience of it when it comes, but it also changes the fact that we don't have to be dealing with crisis when it happens. And most of the work I've done over the years has been watching crisis unfold, because people haven't been ready. You know, I always say this phrase, we have all of our lives to plan to die and no one's ready when it happens.
Nice.
And that seems, it just seems ridiculous to me.
Yeah, I get the mindset between, I think, because of my sister dying young, it makes me far more aware. And I do understand why people probably don't want to face death. But you're right, and I talk about excuses a lot. I mean, anything you ever hear me talk about, I moan about people making excuses. So for me, it's the same format there. People want to make an excuse to not think about death, not talk about death. And in terms of the key elements when you say not dealing with crisis, I mean, what's the key difference between, if you think about the family's mental state and mindset, and I call it mental fitness a lot, but the mental state during someone passing is never good.
Yeah.
But for the individuals that do plan, like you're talking about, what are the key differences there?
I think the really key difference is that if people have planned, they can get on with doing the things that really matter to them in that moment.
Okay.
So rather than thinking, I haven't spoken to my son or my husband for years and years, I wish I could have a conversation with them about, I didn't sort this out at the time, I haven't got a will, people don't know where my money is. All of the stuff that people worry about, and probably when they're ill and when they're dying, don't have the capacity to say out loud.
Yes.
All of that stuff can be said out loud years in advance. has to be dealt with. So, the crisis normally comes from family dynamics, or friend dynamics, or relationship
siblings
dynamics. So people turn up when someone's dying all together, and the relationships that those people have had over a number of years comes to the fore because it's a very tense and a very unreal situation. So I've seen people physically fight, I've seen people shout at each other, do terrible things at that time, and of course we as an organisation have to use our resource to manage that.
Yes.
And people have to use their emotional resilience to manage that at a time when really they could be saying all the things they need to say. I love you, forgive me, I'm sorry, all of those really important things at the end of life. And I think just watching that unfold is really tragic.
It is, and I think, again, if I'm assuming if they've planned, like you said, that those things that may still happen, maybe not so much, because if everyone understands your wishes and what you want to happen, you've already got those bits out there. I guess the family have a far more straightforward experience, maybe. I don't know if that's the right words to use, but...
Well, and I think I would say a more fulfilling experience that they can then take with them forward when they're bereaved, and I think it makes them stronger, it makes things more bearable if they've got good memories of that time.
Yeah. I think that's a really key point, and I'll come back to the personal side here, Nigel, but my sister was young when she died, and me and her, we fell out. I was like her older brother who brought her up, so she used to block me. If I told her some hard truths, she didn't like it, she blocked me, wouldn't talk to me. So we did go through that period of time of not speaking to each other before she found out she was ill. But I was the first person, when she knew she was ill, she phoned me, and it took that for her to apologise to me. And it's sad, really, because if we did do what you're saying and we just planned this, what if I walk out in that road tomorrow and get hit by a car?
Yeah.
What would I regret?
Yeah.
And I think...
and what would your family have to deal with?
Well,
as well as, of course, the shock, the grief, which is perfectly healthy and reasonable, but what else that maybe could have been done in advance?
Yeah, and I learned that the hard way. Obviously, my sister was still alive for 55 days. It wasn't instant, guys, but that still was tough.
Absolutely.
So I completely get your point there. Now, I'm going to go on to a different point here, because I have the benefit of understanding the hospices you lead. And I've specifically noticed positivity in the hospice, which is, to anyone listening to this who haven't got any experiences of hospices, will think, what are you on about positivity? But when I go through the corridors and I speak to staff, and commonly speak to staff there, everyone's very bubbly, very positive, they get along. I'm sure there's tough times. When my sister was dying, I saw those tough times. I saw some of your colleagues crying and have intense moments. But as a whole, they're positive. So how do you, as an individual, you must be part of this leadership in creating a mindset of cultivating positivity. So how is that done in a hospice where people die?
Yeah, well, it's a really important question, and I think it's absolutely a critical one to address.
Yeah.
So from my perspective, particularly when I arrived at Mountbatten, but in other hospices I've worked with, the first thing is together you're going to be doing difficult things. Around that, of course, dealing with people who are dying and bereaved is difficult and challenging. But of course, you've then got an organisation with everything that brings. So you've got funding, which may be difficult and challenging. You've got people who get in the way and can be difficult and challenging. So you've got all of those things coming up. And I remember when I arrived at Mountbatten, where we did have financial difficulties and there were lots of reputational issues, saying to the staff, this is going to be hard. And if it's going to be hard, we're going to have to agree how we're going to behave through this.
Okay.
So, without question, we would be kind and considerate and use our expertise with those people we're supporting who are dying. But actually, we need to do that for each other. Because if we don't, we're never going to be able to get through this together.
No.
So there was that. There was behaviour, I think, is everything. Signing up to that. And being able to call each other to account when it goes wrong, because it does go wrong. I'm not perfect.
No.
And if people can tell me to stop being a twit, then I can tell them to do that as well.
Yeah.
So I think all of that has to be spoken about, it has to be articulated, and it has to be done together as an organisation. So that's really important. And of course, that wobbles. New staff come in, people leave, you have to then revisit it, you have to keep it. So for me, I think that's the single most important thing around behaviour and how are we going to behave through this. I think the other part is again, I've always been someone that's been as open as possible. So if I'm finding things difficult, I will tell people.
Yeah.
Or if there's something going on, I will share it with people because it helps me to see what people's reactions are, hear from them, what they're thinking. So openness, transparency, don't think that is a weakness.
Yes, that's key, yeah.
You know, because there's this thing, isn't there, as a leader, you should never be human, really. You should just...
Unfortunately, in modern day social medias, influencers, everyone thinks they're perfect.
Yeah.
They don't see the failures.
Absolutely.
And I talk about it a lot, but they see the iceberg analogy.
Yeah.
Oh, I really want that success, or I want to be as good as that leader. But they don't see the stuff that goes on before.
No, and there's, nothing wrong with ambition. And one thing I'd really like to talk about is there's nothing wrong with working hard.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes that's got out of fashion.
Yeah, we can talk about that.
Looking after yourself is a thing that really winds me up.
Yeah.
And that's a really difficult thing to talk about. So where was I? I was talking about behaviour and culture.
How you cultivate that side.
Absolutely critical to get it right. So the other thing I think as well is being able to apologise. So I remember when I first arrived at Mountbatten, I did something really stupid.
Okay.
And I pissed a lot of people off really quickly. And it was one of those things where my instinct was not to do something, but I was kind of influenced by a couple of people.
Okay.
And it involved a lot of our volunteers. And, the only thing to do, I got the volunteers together in a room and I stood at the front and I said, look, I fucked up. I'm sorry. And that, I think being able to do that and be able to do it and mean it, can just be really helpful.
Yeah, and I thought, I'm leading. I'll come back to the working hard part because that's something that's on my mind at the moment. But you said about saying something and meaning it, and I want to put statements. I'm not going to name them, but they said to me about you recently. And they said to me that when you talk to them, and anyone they see you talk to, you mean what you say. And for them, I know this might sound really basic to people, but we, again, live in a world at the moment where there's a lot of fake friendships, a lot of fake talking. And I think this person made a point to me that you always talk to them and you mean what you say. Now, whether that's good, bad, or ugly, and you mean what you say, but you do it in a kind... And I've seen it firsthand when people have been upset around you. You let other staff members go and talk to that person. But I've seen you approach an individual who's obviously upset and you're not afraid to talk to them with honesty.
Yeah.
How again, is that something that was just in you, or is that something you've learned and developed? Or
I don't know. I remember my mother when I was, I don't know, I must be about 6 or 7, and she said, the problem with you, Nigel, is people believe what you tell them. And she said, so you need to make sure in life you tell people the truth.
Okay, yeah,
that's really stuck with me. So I've obviously had a bit of a gift for, talking about things, but really learning that what you say has to be the truth.
Yeah.
And if there's nothing wrong with asking questions yourself out loud. So, saying to people, well, this is what I'm thinking. I'm not sure if this is the right thing to do. What do you think?
Yeah.
In doing that, people help you to change your mind.
Yeah.
And I think that's really important because sometimes you have to change your mind.
Yes.
Because you've got it wrong.
Yeah.
And people can help you do that. And that's done through sharing, through talking, in a kind of questioning, open way, I think is really important. So telling the truth is really important. If you can't tell the truth, don't do it.
Yeah, just don't talk.
If you're not ready to tell the truth, don't say anything.
Yeah,
because I think it can really get in the way of a lot of things. I think the other thing is having nerve.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So one of the other things I always say, and I've learned, is always do the right thing, even if the right thing is the most difficult thing to do. Because I watch people, even when I work with them now, who avoid doing the right thing because they think it will just go away. And it just gets worse. So you just have to kind of find your nerve and do the right thing. And it can be difficult. And even last week I had a situation where I had to do something which was really, really hard.
Yeah.
But it was the right thing to do.
And that probably leads back onto the hard work scenario. I think that in my opinion, that sometimes it's a combination of things. If there's something that's really tough to deal with and it looks a bit too much like hard work this day and age, rather than people be honest or just take action and do it, they avoid it. And I've seen the UK 2 weeks ago got the highest depression voting in Europe for young people, and that's quite a sorry sight, really. And I think, I mean, what's your views on how? And I put that, and I put my opinion out here now. This is my opinion, but we've created a culture of people that like to make excuses and not take action. I mean, but that's quite a sad sight.
It is, and I couldn't agree more. I think, we talk about mental health.
Yeah.
And, people will say, well, I'm off work with mental health issues. The reality is they're just feeling a bit sad.
Yeah.
And actually that's okay.
Yeah.
But it's not a mental health issue. It's a normal reaction.
Feeling.
I mean, it's a bit like bereavement. You will know yourself that most bereavement is healthy.
Yeah.
The responses that people have, the reactions they have.
Yes.
And what we need to be able to do is identify the people who have got real issues that need real expert support.
Yeah.
And I think the problem of where we've got to is everything's merged into one kind of bucket.
Yeah.
So the people who really need help are getting missed.
Yeah.
Because so many people with day-to-day issues that we all face.
Yeah.
Sometimes I wake up and I feel sad or I feel a bit depressed. I mean, it's normal.
Yeah.
But what I know is that I've probably got the resilience in me to see that through and get through it, whereas a lot of people don't. It's those people that don't we need to be focusing on, not the ones who are using it. And I don't know whether they're using it consciously, subconsciously, I don't know. But there seems to be a lot of people who are isolating themselves from life because they have what I would call probably quite small issues that are healthy and should be just managed within their normal life. I don't know if that makes sense.
No, it does. I met a young lady, I think she was 16, at a speaking thing I'd done recently. And she waited to talk to me after. I'm not a psychologist, not trained. I'm a very direct talker. You've realised this about me. And everyone who listens to this regularly know I am. She said that she was really depressed. And I said to her, well, what's going on? And she said, my mum wants me to be a doctor, and I don't want to be. And I stood there and I was like, what else? And she's like, well, there is nothing else. I said, we're in a confidential environment here. Whatever you tell me is not going to go anywhere. Anything else? Like, I don't know, anything. No. And I was like, I won't say her name. I said, that's a paper cut.
Yeah.
I said, that's in the reality of the world.
It's a difficult situation to be in, but it's not a depression.
Has she talked about it? No. And I said, have you told your mother? And this is the culture I think I'm seeing in younger people anyway. No. And so she's saying it's depression without understanding if it's depression.
Yeah.
And I said, well, tell your mum you don't want to be a doctor. Oh, what, she doesn't like that. Tell her where to stick it. I said, don't go and not do any work. I was like, but find out what you thought about the cause.
Yeah.
Find your cause, your reason why.
Yeah. And
align yourself to that. And it's a sorry place we're getting to, but I think it's that's what I find so amazing about your Mountbatten, the hospices you lead, the Mountbatten, the staff I come across. I know it's not perfect. Everyone will make mistakes. Everyone has down days. But the togetherness and the positivity is very impressive to me.
Yeah. And I think that cause, if it's really kind of lived and articulated, is contagious.
Yeah.
So I think the behaviour is contagious, the kind of interest, the drive, all of that stuff we've talked about. I mean, I was very fortunate, working for so long in hospices. I worked with Cicely Saunders, who founded the modern hospice movement. I mean, she was a charismatic kind of leader. I mean, it's become unfashionable to be charismatic.
Yes.
Which I think is wrong. I think we have to be who we are at the time. And, charisma, I always think is an interesting kind of thing. Because I've heard people say to me, oh, he's very charismatic. And it's like, well, sometimes I get up in the morning and I'm not, So, it depends on where you are and who you're with. And I think people give you that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So if people are around you and want
the energy,
they give it to you. And if you're the right person, you pick it up and go forward with it. So, I think Mountbatten when I came, needed leadership that was kind of contagious.
Yeah.
Because it had had a lot of leadership that wasn't prior to that. So, being, I guess, intelligent enough to understand that and know that was really important to me. And could I be that person?
Yeah.
Or is this not the right place for me? And I think I was just very fortunate to walk into the right place at the right time with the right kind of energy, really.
Yeah.
So, I do think that cause energy, I don't like the word passion. I think it's overused.
Yeah.
Everyone says I'm passionate as if it's an excuse for something. But I think having drive, commitment, energy to want to change the world, and I want to change the world of how people die. And I'm not shy about that. I don't have any embarrassment about it. That's what I want to do.
No, and sorry to interrupt, but you said to me, one of the first times I met you, Nigel, you said something along the lines of having a good death.
Mm-hmm.
And to be transparent, at that point, I didn't really understand that. I was like, what's a good death? And actually, just for the listeners, just what is a good death?
Well, I think it's interesting, isn't it? We'll all die in different ways. And, for some people, if we all had the choice of how we die, we probably would choose something very different. So, I hear people say, well, I just want to die very quickly.
Yeah.
I guess the thing you don't have with that, unless you put plans in place, is the time to say goodbye to people.
Mm.
So for me, a good death is around a death that's planned.
Yeah.
A death that's had time for people to put in place everything they need to be in place. So relationships are as right as they can be.
Mm-hmm.
Everything is in order from a legal perspective, all of that stuff. I then think really important that people are not in pain.
Yes.
So, we have some incredible medical consultants in Mountbatten, as you know, who are very forward-thinking with pharmacology and drug combinations and are not afraid to try things. So, being able to manage people's physical pain. And then, of course, what comes out of that is probably a whole other level of pain, which is not physical. Yeah. And that's about the things people really want to put in place before they die. Maybe they've got all the plans in place, but there might be a relationship they haven't put right. There might be a conversation they haven't had. And our job at Mountbatten is to help people do that.
Yeah.
And I think the other thing is having the opportunity to tell your story.
100%. Yeah.
So for people, it's so common for people to come to the end of their life and say, well, I haven't done anything with my life.
Yeah, to feel that way, yeah.
But to help people tell their story and see them realise, God, I've actually achieved quite a lot.
Yeah,
having children, doing something, all the kinds of things that people take for granted. And those stories, I think, are extraordinary. And I'm just incredibly fortunate to have heard thousands of them.
Yeah, well, I wanted to bring that up because I remember when you said that to me the first time I heard it. And I did wonder, what's a good death? And now I get it. But, at the time, it was sort of...
Well, I don't know what a good death for me will be. I suppose I'll find out.
Well, yeah, because one thing we know is taxes and death is going to find us.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's the reality of life, really.
Yeah.
Back to the mindset side.
Sorry, I'm picking up on that kind of planning thing. I think there's something really important around taking control of something because the fear around death and the reason why people don't want to go anywhere near it is people think they're going to be out of control. And Mountbatten's kind of message is you can take control of this.
Yeah.
But you need to do it now and you need to do it early, if that makes sense.
Yeah. You have the advanced
the advanced care plan.
Advanced care plan, which
exactly.
It's probably a not a fun thing to go through if you're 20, 30, 40.
Yeah.
But it's a reality of life.
It is.
And I took one of the plans from one of your staff a while ago,
Mm-hmm.
and I wrote it and I put it in my safe.
Yeah.
I said to my mum and that lot, if I happen to kick the bucket, because I do things that push my boundaries.
Yeah.
That's where it is. That's what I want. Job done.
Yeah.
I've probably learned that because I've been around my sister and people like your team, and I've realised it makes life a lot easier for the people you leave behind.
Absolutely. And you can always change your mind.
Yeah.
Once you've done it.
Leave it to the dog, pets, and
Exactly.
rescue centre. I see people do that.
Exactly.
I wanted to ask though, because obviously where we talk about mindset a lot in the Grit and Growth project, is the clear observations you have from the family members' mindset during and after this process.
Mm-hmm.
And actually I think we talked about the advanced care plan briefly then, but also just planning in general.
Mm-hmm.
I guess again you see two distinctively different outcomes in terms of either or is it always the same in terms of how the mindset shifts? So what do you tend to see in observations on that?
Just say a bit more about that, because I haven't quite got.
So what I'm keen to understand is how their mindsets shift during it. Now I know everyone would think, well,
During the dying.
Yeah, I know everyone would think, well, they get sad, but that's not necessarily all people go through in terms of how their mindset shifts and how they're dealing with things. And you might not have observations around it, but is there anything you've seen consistently, or is it just always?
I guess what I see more than not is people. I think people's fear is mostly unfounded.
Yeah.
So as people go through the process, I think they realise that they, first of all, can manage it.
Yeah. Yeah.
The people around them can manage it because they think it's going to be out of control and unmanageable. And actually, for the most part, it's just terribly mundane.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
So, it's there's a normality that people find in dying. And I think what we have to do around them is to find that with them as well.
Yeah.
So a lot of the time for the person who's dying, it might be they've reached the point where they've got themselves to the right place, they know what's happening, but their family are pulling them back and making it uncomfortable. So I always say as well, I think we forget to be normal with the dying.
Yeah.
So we don't quite know what to say. We think we're going to put our foot in it, we're going to say the wrong word. Whereas actually, to be able to just say normal things to each other, if I go in to someone's room at the hospice or visit someone at home and say, oh gosh, that's a really nice colour on the wall, or, your hair looks nice today, or, that's a really good colour on you, the top you're wearing. So it's the normal stuff.
Yeah, that helps.
That people, it gets missed with people who are dying because everything's all about being afraid.
Yeah.
So, talk about the football.
Yeah.
Talk about the Olympics. I was talking to someone this morning about the Olympics. It's normal, but we forget to do that with people who...
Yeah, because you just consume yourself with the death part.
Exactly.
Well, that's a good point, actually.
So normality, people finding normality, I think is important. And people through that, I think, find the resilience to just do the next thing.
A really important question I wanted to ask you, because so trying to put myself outside the hospice thought process here and being a general public member, in terms of how the Mountbatten Hospice, in specific for yourself, how they communicate with the community, because there's always people thinking, that Mountbatten's a large charity in relevance to local environments, and there's a misconception sometimes, oh, they're big, so they've got loads of money. So how does the hospice look to communicate 2 points here? What you need from a community, but also what you do for the community, because they're two different messages for me. So what you need and what you do are two different things. And I think there's a misconception constantly, for me anyway, where I see people think hospice are really loads of money. No charity, well, I don't know of any that has loads of money to use. So how does the Mountbatten Hospice look to communicate that to the public community?
Yeah, very useful question. I think there's a huge difference between confidence and arrogance.
Yep.
So I think confidence is contagious.
Yep.
So I think the more confident Mountbatten is around articulating its key messages and using the right language to people, the more people will engage with us.
Uh-huh.
So I think, one of the things we've done, probably very successfully against all the odds, is opening the hospice building to the public.
Yeah.
I always say the public own it. They pay for most of it, so come and use it.
Yeah.
So people coming in when they don't need to come to a hospice, but they'll come and use the cafe, or they'll come and use a group, or they'll come and do something else. They'll come and sing in a choir,
Yeah.
what have you, I think gives the ownership of the organisation to the community. So it's not my organisation. I'm just looking after it.
Well, you had one of the most successful years in terms of Walk the White, So that's for the Isle of Wight, for the listeners who don't know the Isle of Wight, it's a huge, seen as a huge event that already achieved quite very good numbers historically.
Yeah.
And you can correct me here, but you went and effectively doubled what you would typically do this year.
Yeah.
And that's the message that you must have got through to the community or wider community to achieve that.
Yeah, and I think that's so multifaceted. So, even I can't quite believe Walk the White got to where it got to.
Yeah.
It did. It's a bit of a phenomenon, but it is to do with lots of things that have been put in place over a number of years. And that's been around engaging the community in different ways, making people understand, well, there are a group of people who experience our care, like yourself, who then catch the Mountbatten bug.
Yeah, I think you do, to be fair. When you talk about the good death, but when you see the care,
Yeah. But, it's about kindness, it's about attitude, it's about listening, it's about all of those things. So there's that group of people who you basically got engaged with you. But being confident again to go out and say to everyone, if you're going to live your life out on this island, you're going to need Mountbatten.
Yep.
So therefore, you make a connection instantly with people. And even if people want to talk about it or plan for it or not, that's planted in there.
Yeah.
So, trying to think that there might be a life without Mountbatten makes people think.
Pretty scary thought when you've experienced the care and the level of service.
But it's also, I think, a scary thought when you think you might need something you've heard about and you've maybe heard people talk about their experiences of it that might not be there. It's in my interest that Mountbatten is the best it can be because I'm going to live my life out on the island.
Absolutely. So you want to know you're going to have the best care possible when you get to that point of life.
Absolutely. So I think how we engage with this local community and every part of it is really important. The older population on the island, most people are going to live out their lives here, so they are going to need it. So let's have that conversation.
Yeah.
So people can engage emotionally and then think I can do something to help this and make it, keep it going for when I need it or from when my family need it. Opening, people coming into the building and seeing it, feeling an ownership.
Yeah, and that positive environment like I've talked about.
It's also, colours of furniture, the colours of the walls, artwork, music being played, all of that stuff is normal life.
Yeah.
So why wouldn't you have it in hospice?
Yeah, no, that's a good point.
You think of hospices as being very quiet and you can't go near anything. Actually, there need to be almost normal life on steroids for people to realise that, this is an okay thing.
Yeah, and actually anyone listening who's not been to the Isle of Wight, if you want an excuse to come, this is a little pump for the Walk the White. It's a phenomenal event actually in terms of there's thousands of people that walk and the community and everyone's having a laugh and chatting away, and you end up doing 27 miles. You definitely lie about the distance. It's longer than they say.
Longer, yeah.
But it's a great event if you are.
Yeah, and you have that atmosphere in the middle of it. You've got people wearing T-shirts in memory of my sister with a photo, and it's that again kind of juxtaposition.
Yeah, and I think you said about creating a normal life, the day-to-day life.
Yeah, absolutely.
Another thing I'm really interested in is I found you talked about the doctors being innovative in how they deal with things, but how do you generate a innovative environment in what typically is a highly regulated and I want to use the word mundane, which might not be that nice, but a regulated and mundane well, I look, again, I might be wrong. How do you actually, maybe you come back to the openness, I don't know, but how do you cultivate that innovation?
Well, healthcare is one of the most risk-averse kind of sectors in the world, really. And so many things get stopped because of people's fear.
Yeah.
So, I remember here when we said we were going to open the building to the public, we don't have any signing in process, the doors are open, anyone can walk in at any time. And a lot of what comes, particularly from healthcare clinicians, so nurses and doctors, well, what if?
Yeah.
What if this happens? What if that happens? And it's like, well, whether we take a risk or not, something terrible will happen.
Yeah.
Because that's life.
Yeah.
So just because something terrible will happen at some point, should it stop us doing what we want to do? And trying to get people's confidence again in the fact that actually 99% of the time, nothing terrible will happen. But actually something terrible will happen, whether we do it or not.
Yeah.
And you see that in all organizations, in all sectors.
Yeah.
Place. And it's not, you need to think. I remember someone who used to mentor me said, we spent 40 years learning how to manage risk, and now what we need to do is learn how to take it again. And
that's a great point.
That was really sort of inspiring.
Yeah.
So, being able to take risks together with the people who come to us for care and with each other is really important. I mean, the story, I remember once walking down past the gym in the hospice. We have a gym, very active, and it was about 6 o'clock in the evening, and the door was open, and inside the gym was this guy on the treadmill. And he was in his pajamas and dressing gown with his belt hanging down and a pair of old slippers on this treadmill. He must have been in his 80s.
Oh,
and I remember looking at him thinking something could go terribly
Definitely
wrong.
Could go wrong there.
So I go in and gently kind of introduce myself, and he stops. And the first thing he said to me, he said, "You're not a nurse, are you?" And I said, "No, I'm not." He said, "Good." He said, "Because if you were, you'd have me back in bed." And anyway, it turns out he was this guy in his 80s who'd been in the army. He'd been to the gym all of his life.
Okay.
And he said to me, if I'm going to die on the treadmill, I'm bloody well going to die on the treadmill. And I thought, he knows the risk.
Yeah, he knows the risk he's put himself.
What we can do is help him by maybe changing his shoes, tightening his belt to make sure things can't get in the way. But together, we can take that risk.
Yeah.
Because we both know what's at stake.
Yeah.
So I do think people get in the way of things happening that are going to be life-changing to people.
Yeah.
And their fear, it's so easy, isn't it? Well, we're not going to do that because this will happen.
Yeah, I talk about fear bubbles a lot and people not wanting to step outside.
But sometimes risk is scary.
But more often than not, to be fair, isn't it?
Exactly.
It's the unknown of what if. But you mentioned it earlier, accepting that things will happen.
Yeah. Exactly.
And
it doesn't matter. Things will go wrong and you can put them right.
Yeah.
It's not the end of the world.
Which is quite an unusual environment to be in, really. Like I said, I'm looking at it from an external point of view of outside of the hospice. I know the environment you've created. So, I find that really interesting. And you talked about acceptance and it will happen. And I think that's the reality, isn't it? Learning that it is okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
you won't blame anyone when it goes wrong. That's another issue, isn't it?
Yeah.
He's afraid of being blamed.
In England, and we like to be following the Americans these days.
I hopefully have never blamed anyone in my life. Yeah. Well, certainly in the last 20, 30 years.
Yeah, you can. The reality is it's your choice what you do. And yes, other people make mistakes, but it's still it's still on you to make that choice.
Absolutely.
So something I've only got a couple more questions for you, really, Nigel. The one bit I really wanted to ask about is what your biggest challenges are now. Now, some of it you might not be able to talk about, but obviously what you are allowed to talk about, or able to talk about, should say allowed, be able to talk about. What is the biggest challenges facing the hospice right now?
So, I think just one answer first, and then I'll go and say something else. So I think challenges probably in most organisations are either about two things. They're about people or money.
Yep, nearly 100% of the time.
And so there's a lot of that.
Yeah.
So, we have the most amazing staff at the hospice, but sometimes that goes wrong when someone comes in who just doesn't get it.
Yes.
And I think sometimes people come to work in the hospice or volunteer in the hospice thinking it's going to be all so kind of pink and fluffy and kind and everyone's lovely. We
feel really good.
we are very kind, but actually there's an edge to working at Mountbatten that a lot of people can't cope with.
Yes.
Sometimes the humour is really black.
Yeah.
And you need that.
Guess it's got to be at times. Yeah.
And, we have a senior management team where the culture I've tried to kind of facilitate is one of really hard work, but we laugh so much together and sometimes laugh about things we probably shouldn't, but it's between four walls with the door shut.
Yeah.
And, together you should be able to do that. It doesn't mean you're doing something wrong if you're just letting something out.
Yeah.
So that's really important. So people and money. I think historically in hospices, so people might not understand how hospices exist.
Probably not.
So when the NHS was founded in the 1940s and 50s, dying was never part of the vision.
Yeah.
The NHS, people talk about the cradle to the grave. That was never a thing that was used. So dying in the NHS wasn't what the NHS was set up to do. It was set up for people to go in these shiny new hospitals, get their problems sorted out and get better. And that was the promise.
Yeah.
We'll get you better. And of course, when people went into those hospitals and died, they didn't know what to do. So what they did was they hid it because they didn't want people to know it was possible. And Cicely Saunders, who we mentioned earlier, as a young nurse, saw that happening and wanted to do something about it and couldn't change the culture in the NHS after a few years of it being ingrained there. So she got together with a group of friends, long story short, really, got some money and bought a piece of land on the edge of Crystal Palace Park, South East London, and built the first hospice.
Yeah.
So that was in 1967. So we're not even talking 60 years.
Wow.
So, she was a phenomenon. I always talk about her. She was a pain in the arse.
Yeah.
She was a human being. But when she died, there were 220 hospices in the UK and hospices in 120 countries across the world.
That's some doing.
She did that in under 40 years. So she achieved that. So extraordinary.
Yeah.
But what it did was it separated hospices from the health system as an independent facility. And ever since, there's been a kind of argument as to who should pay for what.
Yeah.
And it's never, ever been sorted out.
Sure.
So every individual hospice has their local individual agreement with their local NHS.
Yeah.
What we need is a national agreement for funding for hospices. 60 years later, no one's ever grabbed that particular bull by the horns and dealt with it. So we tend to get a bit of money from the NHS, the rest of it's fundraised.
Oh, gosh.
I wouldn't want the NHS to pay for everything we do.
No.
Because I think the relationship we have with the community and what they do for us is far too important. So, the engagement we've been talking about with the community, if we didn't have that fundraising, we wouldn't have any of that.
Yeah.
We'd be another NHS facility.
Yes.
But it needs to remain separate from the NHS, but the NHS need to have some responsibility for it. And hospices need to open themselves up to have that conversation with the NHS. But it's hard because they grew out of a protest and a revolution against the NHS. So that's still 60 years later.
Like you said, it's actually very, very new still, real in the reality of this large businesses, which charities are businesses, they're still relatively new.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think people and money, but I think particularly at the moment, that relationship with the NHS, we need to spend some time getting it right and working it through. And there's a reluctance on both sides, I think.
So that's the biggest challenge. Okay. So I've got two more questions for you. And this one's probably more personal than anything. The legacy you want to leave behind. So if you're thinking you're not going to work forever, and I think people are incorrectly, and I want to put this out there now as well. I've had some people say to me that CEOs of charities shouldn't earn money, which really frustrates me. Because I had the same conversation taken away from the charitable side now about who should run our country when the election was coming up. And I had a gentleman in Liverpool tell me that someone who should run our country is it's going to sound, I'm a direct speaker, guys, someone who isn't successful and doesn't have money. I was like, but okay, so if you won £100 million today on the lottery, and you need to invest it because you don't know how to invest it yourself. So you want to look after yourself and not go bankrupt after 2 months. Who are you going to go and use? A guy that knows how to invest money or a person that doesn't know how to because they're a bum and never worked in their life and they've been unsuccessful in everything they've done. I'd use a person who knows how to look. So why should, I'm not saying we should have someone who doesn't understand the real world, and it comes back into the charitable side, and I think sometimes people get confused with that. They expect CEOs not to earn money in charitable things and not want to create a legacy, but the reality is to have a successful hospice, you have to be a businessman. You are obviously charitable, but you have to have the insights and the intellect to be able to do that. So what legacy do you want to create?
Well, I said earlier, I trained as a therapist, counsellor, all of that stuff.
Yeah, that's at the start.
I've also done, huge management training and MBA and everything. I've taken finance exams, all of that stuff, which is really essential.
Yes.
Because you can't do it without that, really. I always say about money, I don't decide what I'm paid at Mountbatten, the Board of Trustees do.
Yeah.
So, you need to talk to them if anyone has a problem with it. Everyone deserves to be paid a fair wage.
For what they do.
For what they do. I don't expect to be paid any more than any other CEO because I work 24 hours a day. And, my work is my life.
Your cause, as you
whether that's right or wrong, it's my life, it's my work, and I decide to do it.
Yeah.
I think in terms of a legacy, what I'm realizing as I come, to the last part of my career, actually, is probably I haven't looked after myself in the way that I should.
Work took precedent, I'm assuming. Then is that what you mean by that?
Yeah, and I think probably I should have found a way of making more time for myself. I'm not very good at that, so I can't tell anyone how to do that, or I would never tell anyone to do that because I've never done it myself. So I think that's something at the moment I'm kind of trying to internalize in myself. Why haven't I done that, and how do I do it now?
Yeah.
As I move forward, I think as a legacy, I just want. I think it comes down to all kinds of things. So I'm a gay man. I don't have any of my own children.
Yeah.
So realizing you're not going to leave that behind.
Okay.
So what is it that I'm going to do that I'm going to leave behind? Yeah. So I've been very driven to do that. I've written a few books and various things, nothing earth-shattering, but it's for me, it has been around creating a legacy. Whereas for a lot of people, the legacy might be about having children or building their own house or what have you. I just want people to remember and say that I did the best I could, really, and that I made a difference.
Yeah.
And there's nothing more important than that for anyone.
I think from my behalf, and I could talk as a person that's experienced what your team delivered, you definitely made a difference from that perspective. Mm-hmm. And that's why I wanted you on this podcast, because obviously I've got an element of people I don't know and people I do know. And for me, you're one of the best CEOs I've met, really, in terms of the way you communicate to people, the way you lead people, the way you've created an environment in an area of death, which to me is got to be one of the toughest environments to create a positive environment. And for me, that's why I wanted you on here. That's why I wanted to understand the legacy. And I think we've gone through a lot today, and I'm really appreciative of it.
Yeah.
And I think I can say for sure that you've definitely already done that for a certain amount of families, and I'm sure there's more than my family that would say that.
It's hard, isn't it, to do that for yourself, because I consistently feel like I've never achieved anything, but that's maybe part of the whole why things work in the way they do.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with being ambitious. There's nothing wrong with being proud of what you achieved. But there's always more to do.
I think I released something recently, and this is all part and parcel of this project and podcast. Successful people always feel like they haven't done that. Always. And I think, unfortunately, what our mainstream media and influencers tell people is the opposite. That I'm successful and I'm super happy and I live the best life ever. The reality is they probably do live a happy life.
Yeah.
But as a successful person, it is okay to always feel like you're not okay.
Yeah.
Because how do you drive forward?
Yeah.
If you don't have that?
It's that kind of combination between feeling you've never achieved anything, but my God, if anyone tells me I can't do anything,
I'm going to go and do it.
Yeah. I've always been like that.
Yeah, and that's why I said, I've already said, that's why I wanted you on the podcast, because I found you as a very influential person. I felt what you've done as a team, with your team anyway, I think is quite inspirational, to be fair. And I always end it with the same question here, Nigel. There's no right or wrong answer, but I love to understand, what is your definition of success? And you've sort of gone over some of this, but what is, if you were to say a definition of success to you, what is it?
Gosh. Definition of success, I suppose. Just feeling confident in your own skin, really. Well, something, when you look at someone and they're okay with themselves.
Yeah.
Something about feeling okay with yourself and knowing that really you are a good person and you're trying your best. And I know that I will always do the right thing. I will always try my best, even if I have to go through a thought process which is telling me something different.
Yeah.
But I know myself well enough that I will always do the right thing, and that I am a good person.
Oh, perfect. Look, I really appreciate your time. I know you're a very busy guy. You've got a lot of plates spinning, but I really appreciate your time. Listeners, we're going to put ways to see how Nigel communicates. I'm going to share links to the Mountbatten Hospice so you can engage and support if you wish. But thank you again, Nigel.
Thank you.